Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
This is a podcast about entrepreneurs. Given that, our guest today might be a little unexpected. Mirka Wilderer is the archetypal corporate innovator. Having spent her career with some of the biggest names in the space, until last year she was CEO of De Nora and led the IPO of the Italian company. Under her tenure, De Nora evolved into a force in the water market globally, especially in the US and increasingly in Southeast Asia. She's a model professional and, as you will hear, deeply insightful on the science, management, team motivation, and strategy. All company builders can learn from her example. Please note that at the time of recording, Mirka was still the CEO of De Nora, though she announced her resignation shortly afterwards. We can't wait to see what's next. Please enjoy my conversation with Mirka Wilderer. Mirka, hello. It's really kind of you to spend the time. How's everything going?
I'm very well. How are you?
Very well indeed. Just suffering from a post-Halloween sugar sort of coma disaster, but nowhere near as bad as my son, which it was quite intense this morning. I really appreciate you being here. So this is a bit of a different conversation for us in that we're used to, and I'm used to, spending the lion's share of our time with early stage founders, while you're in charge of a public company, have experience with two of the biggest names in water and industrial. So why don't you start by walking us through your story and career so far?
So my entry into the water space actually goes back way into my childhood. Both my parents were scientists in the field. And so dinner conversations growing up were about water treatment. In fact, they're focused on biological water treatment. Every vacation, we had to stop by some stinky treatment plant. When I graduated, I actually couldn't get away far enough from the water space because I thought, my goodness, this is nasty stuff they're dealing with. I started with Siemens in the energy field, and in 2004, Siemens acquired US Filters. And at that point in time, I was mature enough to value the meaning of water. And so I got pulled into developing at first the Southeast Asia strategy for US Filter, or then what became Siemens Water. 2009, I joined the company officially. I moved to the US for that. Different roles there. In 2014, Siemens divested Siemens Water Technologies, which became Evoqua. And I stayed on with the business there. We became private equity owned. I took on the role as general manager, stayed through the IPO of Evoqua in November 2017. And since 2019, I'm with De Nora, first female CEO there. De Nora is a third generation Italian family owned business, headquartered out of Milan, Italy. We're super proud. Next year, we're going to celebrate 100 years. It's not 100 years in water. In 2015, De Nora acquired Severn Trent Purification, and that became the foundation of what is known as De Nora Water Technologies now.
Amazing that you've got this circuitous route going kind of, from hopefully not actually knee deep in the water sector on your family holidays.
Actually, my very first job was in my dad's lab at university when washing out the flask. I must have been 12 or 13 or something like that. So not knee deep, but definitely hands-on.
That's wild. That stuff can stay with you. But you took this all the way to your PhD. What was your specialization?
Actually, not water. I studied international management. And the big question, and if international companies are trying to drive global synergies, yet they're in all these different countries around the world. How do you actually do that? How do you bridge that global-local stretch?
That sounds seriously relevant. And I think we're going to come on to sort of quite a lot of important stuff there. I want to stay just quickly with your Genesis story for a second. So being around scientists, my parents are kind of fairly assiduous, kind of like arts people rather than scientists. I'm really curious, the scientific approach that you were it sounds like you were exposed to as a child, how do you think that informs your management style or the way in which you think about company building or the way in which you think about people, like, what did you take away from that experience that you think is most useful still today?
One is, of course, the desire to drive innovation and to push the current state of thinking, to not just settle for this is how we've always done it, but there's always new ways to consider it based on the new knowledge and experience and insights that we have gained. Our family name, Wilderer, translates to poacher. And my dad has always made that his mantra, saying, we're hunting on foreign ground. So what can you learn from adjacent fields of knowledge of science that we can introduce to find solutions for this particular problem we're trying to solve? So that has stayed with me for sure, where I'm always looking, what are the best practices within water, but also outside of water? What are other companies doing in the world that maybe we have to tweak it a little bit, but we're not the first. And so adaptive innovation, right? Just bringing something into the water space.
It's super interesting. I was just listening to the story of Walmart, and it's amazing once you immerse yourself into the world of retail. I mean, they're all just stealing ideas off each other. I mean, there is a sort of amount of originality, and then it spreads like absolute wildfire. And then the second thing that triggers for me is really interesting things happen at the intersection of two ideas that don't obviously belong together. It's one of these things that I find myself getting stuck into reading kind of a lot of business books and, all the rest of that stuff, typical VC, etc. But actually, it's super important that I read novels and things that have nothing to do with what we're doing about, trees and art and like whatever it is. How do you keep that instinct quick? How do you keep that kind of instinct for, adjacencies and openness to good ideas, like fresh within yourself as a leader and also within your team?
So I'm a vivid reader, like you just mentioned yourself. So I'm constantly reading books. I'm also very actively participating in events outside our water industry. I'm fortunate I'm a member of YPO, Young Presidents Organization. So they have events across all industries, and there's always inspirational ideas coming from some of the other cool industries that are out there.
Yeah, super interesting.
And so how do I translate that into my team? One of my favorite things is we've implemented a day of learning. And it's not a full day. It's typically 2 hours. And we go around the room. Every member of my leadership team hosts one. So it's your turn once a year or something like that. And they can bring whatever topic is of inspiration to them. And then we'll have a conversation about it. And those are the most fun and provocative and insightful conversations that we have. And everyone typically takes something away from it. We actually, at the end, we go around the room and say, well, what did that inspire in you? And it's always very cool to see.
That is amazing. We just had our founder forum in New York last week. And this is something that we ended up talking about in our final conversation. I thought this was something that only startups did. But look at this. In a public company, the same thing is happening. I think that's wildly impressive to try and keep really clearly communicating this idea that good practice and opportunities and innovation can come from anywhere, and keeping your mind open to that is such an important practice. And then practically doing that within the leadership team. Absolutely fascinating. So you're an entrepreneurial person, very clearly, with a big co background. So what do you think small companies can learn from big ones in terms of being effective in this marketplace?
Thank you for calling me an entrepreneur, because I love seeing myself that way too. And it's hard sometimes in big corporations to keep that mindset, keep the customer at the forefront of what we do, and really focus on driving enterprise value and not just complying to rules and processes that have been set by others. But I do think that large companies have established a sort of professionalism that works as you scale a company, as you drive growth. Actually, this was one of the topics I've learned from YPO. The methodology is called Scaling Up by Vern Harnish, and build that into my approach many times, and it works. And the first element is to focus on building a strong leadership team. It all goes with the team. And I think in large companies, we probably have the luxury of having more distinct, specific functional roles, and then get the best leader there. I always say you have the team that you deserve. You build it, you work it. It's not easy, right? Sometimes you have to make hard decisions, but if you build a strong leadership team, that's really the foundation of everything. I think the next element that is sometimes viewed as, just nice to have, is that clear vision, mission, and strategy. right? It's not just a paper exercise to have pretty PowerPoint slides that you can show on conferences, but I do think it's absolutely important to have a visual understanding of where am I going? Where is the journey going? There's hundreds of options. And so which one do I take? And I think one of the most important strategic decisions is actually the no. What am I not pursuing? Because I see oftentimes when we engage with smaller companies, they're chasing everything under the sun because they're so desperate to gaining size that they are losing traction and effectiveness by not saying no often enough and just going after whatever's out there. I think based on the strategy, then identifying what are the key improvement priorities, that's how we call it. Again, you typically, when we go more in planning cycles, we have over 100 key improvement ideas, but then prioritizing it to the handful of ones we go after, again, say no, and make sure that everyone is aligned around those 5 key priorities and everyone follows. And I think one way, and that's my last point, is to accomplish that is then to establish a very rigorous, I call it management operating system, sounds horrible, but it's that rhythm of daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings to make sure that the number one priority stays the number one priority and doesn't get lost in the whirlwind of activity. So really making sure that we know what it is, we regularly talk about it, we know the leading KPIs, how do we know that we're on track or not, and making sure that the entire organization pulls in the same direction.
Absolutely fascinating. I feel like that was a blizzard of like really kind of like fundamentally hugely important kind of management ideas, like actually implemented practically, which I think is embarrassingly rare. That's really, really cool. I love this idea of keeping the main thing, and how you actually do it. Because I slightly want to work backwards a little bit through that answer. So in terms of keeping the main thing and making sure that the priorities remain the priorities, is that a question of just communication? Is this a you job? Is this just something that happens on your daily interactions? How do you actually make sure that people are focused on the key improvement priorities that you've selected for a given period of time?
So one thing, it's not just me selected, but the entire team. I think that's important for the buy-in, right? It's not something that happened on me. We're right in that phase right now. So the teams are bubbling up. These are what we think we should be working on for next year. We'll meet next week to, as a team, have that dialogue. Well, what is a good set of these key improvement priorities that we actually take on? So I think one important element is to have the buy-in. It's the topics the team suggested, and that we're selected in a process. Not that every one of my ideas will be selected, but at least I was part of it. I have some buy-in, some ownership and accountability to that process. I do think it is important then to constantly talk about it, but it's not just about talking about it. If we have monthly report outs, weekly report outs, action item meetings, it keeps it on the calendar. It keeps it, timeshare. It keeps it up. And then I mentioned KPIs, leading KPIs. How do I know that I'm on track? I think we all learned in the last 3 years that the world changes faster than we can develop plans. So my goal is not to develop the perfect plan, take 2 years and plan and then finally go to execution, but to have, this is the North side, this is where we're going. This is what we think the outlook should look like. And then we walk towards it, enter our sprints, work a week, see what we learned. We're still on track. Great, continue. Something changed. What did we learn? How do we need to adjust and pivot? And so it's I think also a big learning exercise, allowing for that regular feedback and input to make sure that somehow we get to that path. Might not be a straight line, but we have the outlook in mind. So I think it's more than communication. It's buy-in, ownership, accountability, learning, team input.
It's so interesting because it's almost kind of making sure that the emergent strategy is overlaid with kind of determined strategy. It's deal with the world as it is, not how you'd like it to be, and kind of put your head in the ground and like, no, we have a strategic vision. It's like, yeah, but the world changed. Wait, what? Why would you? Okay. Yeah.
Right. After COVID, we've talked a lot about, when COVID hit, we said, oh, we want to go back to normal. And then the idea of the new normal came about. And now we're talking about the next normal. It's going to be evolving. It'll continue to evolve. So what's that next normal look like? And maybe it's just for a month or two. Let's see how we get to the winter. But
exactly. It feels a bit like Game of Thrones, doesn't it? Winter is almost here. And judging by that TV show, it was a bit of a challenge. This idea of the, emergent versus determined came up really interestingly. We were talking about this, about the idea of cultural fit, which I think has always sat slightly sort of oddly with me because it treats kind of culture as determined. And I think to a certain extent, you want culture to be determined. You don't want it to be like fully flexible. But as you add people, the addition of people means that you have the additions to this culture. So it's going to be at least partially an emergent thing. The much better way of talking about it is that they are is somebody coming in as kind of a cultural addition. It sort of opens yourself to new ways of doing things. Going back a little bit, maybe this is my sort of MBA talking to me, but I would be really interested in any reflections you had on the intersection between strategy and your competitive moat, like how you think about a sustainable competitive advantage. One of the first exercises that Marissa and I did when we had our first in-person working session talking about the new normal in June was to actually run through a strategic analysis of the venture capital business. And when you do that, given that we're providing a commodity, when you realize that actually of the 7 powers of Hamilton Helmer or however you want to cut it, like we only have brand. And brand is not just about what we say out there and what our website looks like. It's actually how we treat people, how we treat founders, how we say yes, how we say no, what happens after we say yes, etc. That's the foundation of our hopefully long-term competitive advantage. But as you think about the notion of strategy and durable competitive advantage, which you may not agree, but it seems like a kind of a reasonable idea that should be the outcome of a successful strategic kind of planning process over the long term. I'm just curious how you sort of see that intersection and how that might apply to your role as the CEO.
It's critical, right? I mean, the vision or the strategy for the long term needs to help to maintain, expand, strengthen that value proposition to the customer. And I mentioned earlier, I think one of the most important strategic decisions is no. I have seen many companies that were unclear in their strategy, then saying yes to every opportunity that came their way, whether in their core strength and core capabilities or not. And then you get a muddled something, and it's hard to differentiate. Why should I go with you versus someone else? And so I think, being very clear for us, for example, we say we have the entire disinfection portfolio. We're disinfection. There's a lot more to water treatment than disinfection, but we're trying to stay really core to let's be the best possible disinfection company and be able to build on that instead of trying to have every technology under the sun in our portfolio and then being mediocre at all of them. So I do think the strategy is important to help sharpen that understanding based, of course, how do you build strategy on customers, market trends, competitors? It can't be an inward looking strategy only.
So interesting. I always, as a British person coming into the sort of US business world, the lionization of Jack Welch kind of leading up to 2012. Now, I'm not going to ask you to pass comment on anything, but it did seem to me like poor old Jeff Immelt just got absolutely steamrolled by the ramifications of exactly what you're talking about, which is like, we're going to do everything. We're going to trade in our brand. We're going to start everything from kind of like, a gigantic lending company to whatever the hell else. And then you see the ramifications of that lack of focus. The idea and the ruthless pursuit of exclusion, I think, is really fascinating.
And I can tell you from my own experience, right? Siemens is, their vision and officiate always in BGE and vice versa. We know that from the other side too. And so they bought water. Siemens bought water. It was one of the fastest acquisitions in the history of Siemens. Why? Because GE had just acquired a water company. But it was a short 10-year experience, right? 10 years later, they divested the business. And I find that actually courageous. We came to the conclusion that it was just not a fit. It was not a fit for a company that is really strong in electrical engineering controls and all that. Yes, that is needed in water too, but water lives of more than just controls. So that was a good example of going into let's do everything and then remembering back the core of the business and making the necessary, sometimes hard decisions, right? But they're actually ultimately for the better of all parties.
You're absolutely right. I think brave is a really good word for it, because I think there's a sort of temptation to be like, la, 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 we're going to make the M&A work and it's going to be like, great and, all the rest of it, rather than, let's just move on from this. I don't know whether you spent sort of a ton of time on the kind of the M&A side of things, but thinking about the addition of capabilities into the organizations that you've been on. Now, this could be obviously in your leadership role at the moment, or could have been observing this. What have you learned about the inorganic growth pathway that sort of most strikes you? I always sort of think it's amazing that this statistic that 80% of M&A doesn't yield the value that is on the spreadsheet. What are your thoughts on that side of things?
It goes back to the criteria I mentioned. I think really important is the quality of the team that you're acquiring. What's that quality of the team, and is there a fit? There's cases where it's just not a fit, and then it's going to get really hard to do that. Well, on the other hand, if you have a strong, dedicated entrepreneurial team that sees the potential of the new togetherness, then we're going to get through whatever challenges we're going to face. I think the vision is important, right? How does it fit in terms of communicating both to the existing team already? This is why they're coming in, and also to the new team is how you're going to fit, right? There's oftentimes that anxiety by the acquired of, are they going to shut us down? Do I have a future? Am I the unwanted orphan or stepchild, right? And so you want to bring them in and say, you're important. And by the way, I put money on the table because I want this capability. You're valuable. And so as we are then blending the processes, blending the strategies, the key priorities that we talked about earlier, how do they come in? I think the most critical one is though the balancing of not steamrolling over the newly acquired business and saying, okay, you're now merged in and nothing remains from your previous identity. But seeing that I feel like we have the biggest opportunity for innovation by people coming in from outside, whether new hires or through an acquisition. What are we blind to already that they might see? So really listening to those comments while, of course, also understanding that, okay, maybe previously you were a standalone small company and now you're merging in. I love, when we're standardizing processes or tools, it's everyone's always for it as long as you do it the way that we're used to. So the harmonization of processes, bringing everyone in. So that's some of the challenges that we have to work through. That balance, it's not one or the other, it's give and take. It is at times muddy and challenging.
Muddy and messy, right? It's a bit like cleaning out the beakers right, so as a 12-year-old. So a helpful segue, because I wanted to actually go back up your sort of previous answer, moving down through kind of mission, vision, strategy. And you talked about having a strong leadership team. How do you think about hiring? What's your process? What do you think other people, especially people earlier in their CEO career, can think about hiring?
Well, for me personally, it's really important that we might get to that further later on in the conversation too, but building a diverse team. I'm looking at cognitive diversity. Can I build a team that has as different individuals as possible, different experiences in life, different functional backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, of course, gender, really building that diverse background. So I'm not so interested in mainstream candidates in individuals that have something unique to show to. And then you have your role and you look for the best possible candidate in that role. I've had great success in not looking for someone that has already checked all the boxes and has so much experience that they sometimes also become rigid, but instead looking for that future talent that might only check a few boxes of what I'm looking for, but has enough of a drive, energy, willing to learn, and novel expression that I feel that that's going to work. Does that work always? Nope. Right? Sometimes people get overwhelmed. That's a balancing act to do between how much do you need to bet on already proven track record versus future promise.
I think about this all the time. One of our values is be the M maximizer, as in Y equals MX plus C. A lot of people are solving for the Y intercept. So the C of the equation, but actually what matters is the slope of the line, which is the M. How do you think about making sure that the people that you hire kind of fulfill their potential? And then there is anything that you think is helpful for leaders about firstly recognizing when it's not working and what to do about it when it isn't?
Again, if I think about the interviewing process, right, if there's someone that tells me they've done everything under the sun and they're great at everything, then I stop listening because that's impossible.
Yeah. And it was all them, right? It was always all them. Nothing to do with the team around them.
All them. So I prefer people that have like a very clear, and similar to what we discussed about a business, a clear understanding. This is me and this is what I've done and what I'm good at. And this is things that are outside of me. I much rather have that candid openness. So in the interviewing process, we test the story and the experiences and how they've dealt in the past with difficult situations. We help ourselves with various different profiling tools, but just help us to understand the personality. We've never said no to candidate based on that, but it just helps us to understand what type of person is this that I'm talking to. And then I think references are super important to understand other people that you've worked with in the past. How are they talking about you now? And do they confirm what we're seeing in a short period of time?
The reference process. Absolutely invaluable. I mean, you touched on it, so I'd love to go there next, which is one of the things that I think is most striking about you as a leader is the degree to which you walk the talk. A lot of people talk about, yeah, of course, we want to, encourage a non-traditional kind of like diverse set of people kind of coming into water, people in our leadership teams, people who do the hiring. And you spend a lot of time with the next generation of leaders, particularly next gen female leaders. So what led you there? Can you talk a little bit about your activities in that field? What's that experience been like?
Where do I start? I'm a female CEO in a very male-dominated environment.
Very male. Yeah.
And so while, of course, appreciate the insights and experience, there's no hard feelings there. I'm looking for driving diversity. I'm not looking to do that because it's on vogue right now and it's a part of a good corporate tone and messaging. I'm doing it from a pure business perspective, which means innovation. If we continue to ask the same type of questions to the same type of people, we will get the same type of answers. If we want different answers to maybe novel questions, we need to invite different people to the conversation. And so I think, especially in the last 2 years, where the new business, as unusual as I call it, is, this continuously changing, dynamic, unexpected environment that is challenging us, I think we need to look for inspiration in unconventional places. And so that's where I'm so keen on finding talent that we can help groom into the world. I think we have an opportunity, right? We've dealt with the Great Resignation that has opened up more jobs than maybe we have wanted. There's a silver tsunami coming with a lot of retirement in the heads. So we have roles to fill. And so why don't we fill them with people from different walks of life? And so to me, the purpose is to drive innovation and make sure that the business gets to a different level. And I think we need to make sure that we are looking differently. So I've claimed that I'm consciously biased. There's this whole DEI language of unconscious bias. I'm consciously biased. I'm making myself available, especially for a diverse talent. I intentionally call it diverse. It's oftentimes female. Looking back to what has brought me to where I am, I've certainly had strong relationships and networks I have been part of where there's been very inspiring ladies that kind of role modeled what I thought was great, but that have also helped me to learn and to explore, right? Have good conversations. And so my goal is to make myself available for the next generation of leaders, share my experiences, but more importantly, be their support system, be their sounding board, discuss the topics that are on their mind, and help them to shape their amazing journey. It will look different than mine. So it's not about imprinting mine on them, but it's about helping them to have also the courage at times to continue onwards. It is a very strong topic for me. Just later today, I will have one of my mentees and I'm excited about it. I always take more from it, I feel like, than I get from these conversations.
So it's selfish. No,
Totally.
I really do mean it. I really do mean it. From our earliest conversations, I was really, really struck by the degree to which you actually apportion the time to do this. And it really is, it's much, much rarer than it should be. And obviously, we applaud you. So just shifting gears a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about a couple of market things, but I just want to stay on the kind of the reflection side of things. So firstly, you've had a very interesting career coming up through product management, you've had chief of staff roles, and then you've been kind of in charge of very, very large sections of revenue. It seems like a really interesting training ground for where you find yourself at the moment. At the, you definitely, it sounds like part of the servant leadership. So maybe you're not at the top of the hierarchy, you're at the bottom if we are inverting the org chart. But of the jobs you've done, which of them do you think has been most valuable in terms of the job that you're doing now?
I started out in Siemens for a period of time. I was in in-house consulting. And I go back to that in terms of the management toolbox that I have gained in that period of time of just quick rapid fire tools. But then you need to bring them to life and apply them. And so I think each one of my roles, I had the opportunity to practice something in depth. One of my mentors actually told me early on that if you think about a career, you can have a very strong functional career. But if you want to go into more of a general management direction, I remember his image was you need to have a chair with multiple legs, at a minimum 3, otherwise the chair will tilt. And 4 is better. And so the advice was build out different functional expertise. And so to your question, which one was most important? I think the combination is what matters. I think it's also important to get those different perspectives, not one function versus the other. Little example, I was still in corporate developing a service initiative together with Boston Consulting Group that was rolled out to all of the Siemens business units. And 1 week later, I'm sitting in the desk of head of strategy at Siemens Water Technologies. And they say, oh, we have this corporate request, fill out this template. And I look at the template, I'm thinking, what idiot designed this template? It's not applicable to this business. And it was comical because I had designed it. And so, right, you want to change the sides and look at it. It made total sense from that perspective, and it made no sense from the other perspective. So changing the sides, whether you go to different countries and look at it from a different regional perspective, whether you go into different functions, every function has their primary element that they're trying to optimize, whether it's sourcing, is it cut costs, make sure that we get the lowest possible cost, engineering best possible solution. It's not one or the other. It's having both sides come together. And so I think in a career, if you switched through multiple functions, you're learning to value why they're presenting it the way they're presenting it, and how do I find a solution from all of that. And so that, I think, has been valuable. So my recommendation would be change functions is more important than find the one perfect role.
Building the chair with more than two legs. Tilty chair, no good. Interesting. And then on the other side of it, as you turn it up, so now that you're, in the CEO role, what has that job taught you? Perhaps something that you sort of didn't expect on the way in.
I have to admit that when I started my career, I didn't start it with the goal in mind that I want to become CEO. It was always, I want to be the best in this current challenge that is presented to me. So I always had a very high excellence in my current role. And it was also included with a lot of learning. So, or when I think about when did I start verbalizing that I want to become a CEO, what inspired me to that? And I think it was the desire to bring together these different talents in our organization, not just work on a single problem, build a more modern organization. And I think that was also, I have to admit, heavily driven by the shortcomings of some of the traditional leaders that I have observed in my career. And I thought, I can do better than this. We can all do better than this. So to answer your question, what some of my surprises mean, looking back, I was also very naive, right? It's not as easy. And so how do you bring together the ends of the spectrum? How do we transform a business into a modern organization that taps into all available talents while leveraging the strength of the existing organization? You mentioned it earlier, right? You don't want to lose your cultural heritage. How do you drive innovation while leveraging the strength of the legacy of the business? And so it's not ends to a continuum, right? It's an and. How do we do both? And so that's the interesting challenge as I grow more mature.
It's very interesting. I don't know why it's come up twice in the conversation, but like Jeff Immert has this great quote, every job looks easy when you're not the one doing it. Yes, it's just like, wow, there are layers to this onion. But I also think there's a really interesting idea that's related to this idea of inclusion. I mean, the central idea is that of inversion, which is, well, Ben Franklin's favorite ideas, but Charlie Munger's really into it, which is that you can almost take the most from the examples about like how maybe it's not such a good idea to do this.
And I think it takes courage. Again, we come back to courage, right? It takes active listening. It takes trust to be able to face some of these very controversial ideas, but then also the courage to experiment. And not every experiment will work out. We love winning. No one likes to be losing. No one likes to be called out, well, I let the team down. But if we want to innovate and move forward, we're going to have experiments that won't work out. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with when something doesn't work out? And is it then the fault of the person who brought in this novel idea? Do we crucify that person and done with the experiment of diversity? Or do we say, no, you know what, let's all take a responsibility here and see how we can make it work? Is there a different way?
How do you maintain that instinct in a corporate context? I've seen some really interesting ways of people that go about like engendering this, almost like the enforcing the idea of experimentation within their organizations. How do you make sure people are doing it? Is it KPIs? Is it selection before the fact?
I think, again, we have this process of finding all these ideas, top improvement priorities. And that's where it starts from, right? And I always say it's great to have lots of ideas. We will always have over 100 running ideas, which is like overwhelming to like, oh, so many things we need are broken. No, they're not broken. But we have wonderful ideas of how to improve the business and then pick a few. I think the next key thing is to empower the team, right? It can't be me from some corner office saying, yep, by the order of my decree, we do this. It needs to be team. And then one of our really successful approaches has been to build teams of teams. And these teams are around a key priority, a key function, maybe a passion topic. where we bring together teams from different parts of the world, different functional backgrounds, and they are in charge. They're fully empowered, and based on their market insights, their experience, they are determining the roadmap and how we have an executive champion sort of helping the team, but we're empowering that team. And so to me, that's a really strong entrepreneur bottoms-up approach. And then we'll have weekly sprints and we learn and we do it. So we'll have the executive coaches sort of helping to make sure that it's still in the general direction. But these teams have been a great source for us in terms of finding ideas from the remote parts of the organization and then exploring how do we bring them into a roadmap for this particular topic.
That's fascinating. I really appreciate it. So we're going to switch gears now. I'm going to take you off into the markets. So when we were speaking a few months ago, you mentioned sort of excitement about the Southeast Asian market. And in particularly, interestingly, kind of organizationally, kind of within De Nora. What's the opportunity you see there first? And then what reflections have you had about the performance of the team out there that has been particularly striking?
So I've been blown away and really impressed by the organization that we have in Asia. As a background for De Nora Water Technologies, we have three main regions, Americas, EMEA, and Asia. These days, Americas and Asia are head-to-head the largest regional hubs, with EMEA being a distant third for us, which is also interesting being a European headquartered business. Years ago, America was clear ahead. And then the last 4 years, the Asian team has really done tremendous progress with organic growth. We've now had a couple acquisitions in Americas that has put America back in the lead, but it's a head-on-head race.
It's good. Sounds like competition.
It is healthy competition, right?
Helpful.
What's been really interesting is that in this, we talked about the uncertainties and unexpected changes we've all experienced in the past few years. And what's been really impressive is that this team in Asia, and we have teams in Japan, China, and Singapore, they have always taken whatever challenge there is with a curiosity and an attitude of, let's see how we can solve that, and a very strong can-do attitude. There's not been once a moment of complaint or finding excuses or leaning back, seeing if we can sit this out. No, they've been heads on. Let's drive this. Let's find a solution and really make a difference. And that type of energy and drive and passion to me is very unique.
Yeah, it's tremendously helpful, especially in the context where you're starting from such a large revenue base as you are. And then in the market more generally, I mean, you've had, I believe, 2 periods of time in China. What are your reflections on water in the Chinese market, and how that might be changing? I mean, I suppose particularly in the last 12 months, I think that's on kind of everybody's mind. How do you think about the Chinese market?
Yeah, so I've had 2 turns in China, not with water. That was prior to water, 2 times with Siemens, which gave me a helpful understanding of this incredibly rich and diverse culture. I have to say, first time I got to China, I was a little embarrassed almost by myself. There was me, young Mirka in her early 20s, coming from headquarters in Germany, thinking I would tell the team something. And then even the basics, I look my handwriting and you look at their handwriting. I look at my proud European history of 2,000 years, and they have 6,000 years. My cooking were the European cuisine and then the China. I mean, it's just so more rich and multidimensional that I thought, wow, I really underestimated the richness of that market, culture, country. So I think one of my takeaways is, especially as I observe my strong China team now, is my team in China has been together for over 20 years, all Chinese. And they're running the business as a Chinese company, engaging with the customers on a Chinese way. Where previous organizations that I was associated with, it was always the expat model. Let's send someone from somewhere else in the world to teach and show them how it's done. And I just haven't seen the same type of results in the other models.
Yeah, it's kind of, parachute in from Cincinnati and and wonder why it doesn't go well. I think it's absolutely fascinating because it's so big and so many problems, as we saw obviously this summer along with Europe. And actually, that's where what you said triggered a little bit of a European reflection. You're a European person in charge of a European company. Europe obviously has its, fair share of problems on the water side, again, made very, very vivid this summer. But as you said, this is a relatively small market for you in terms of how your business is structured. Like, what are your reflections about the European market, whether it's as a place to do business, or what do you think about the dynamics? Is there sort of good stuff to come from the European market?
And the challenge in Europe is the heavy set of regulations. and the long time it takes to be in the process to getting the certifications that you need. We are in the process, but it's certainly a barrier to entry. And I think then, of course, also while it's the European Union, all these different countries and setups doesn't help it. I have to be honest, we call it EMEA region, and our biggest success is the Middle East. I see a lot of activity right now. I'm very impressed by what I see from the Middle East. I've spent time in Saudi this year as a woman, which was novel too. I asked them if I should cover up, and they said, please don't. We are changing and we want to make that visible. I see a lot of progress and determination, right? Walk the talk. Here's our vision and here's the money to it. And so we see a lot more activity from the Middle East right now than we see from some of the European countries.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it develops. I mean, there's always we wrote an article, I think, at the beginning of this year, God, time flies, just about the benefits of the UK market from having a regulator that it really does have teeth, in terms of creating the problems that then people respond to and need innovative solutions in order to be able to avoid kind of very, very large fines for everything from, CSOs to, other contamination events. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Europe develops. One of the things that's been on my mind is the PFAS issue. It's the worst pain point we've seen in the US. People bursting into tears on stages in water conferences, regional water conferences are particularly bad in the Northeast. Like, how do you think about the segue to Europe is that we're getting there in Europe. It's starting to kind of catch on as an idea. It's not quite the EPA's circular regulations that are going to come in next year, but PFAS is going to be big. I know that you've thought about this sort of reasonably closely as an opportunity. How do you think about it?
I do agree that emerging contaminants such as PFAS are a key topic, starting out from the US, but soon in all countries around the world. We take pride in the fact that we have a very diverse portfolio of disinfection and oxidation products that allows us to tackle the problem in multi-barrier approaches. It's not going to be one nice, clean solution, but multi-stage. So we have, especially after the acquisition of the UV business, we have UV-based, ozone-based, electrochlorination-based AOP solutions in-house. So that's exciting and a focus of ours. We're also combining it with the biological processes. We have developed them, we've had our SOAR product line for a long time around arsenic removal. And so we're leveraging that experience, again, trying to leverage experience from other areas to see how can we work this. We've come up with a really cool new vessel design that the team is super excited about. I think overall what we're seeing is an evolution away from maybe, the first approach was a granular activated carbon, then the single-use resin ion exchange, and now to more of a regenerable ion exchange approach. And so how do we make that happen? How do we work that? So that's sort of the angle that we're taking here.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. We deal with this a lot, I think, and we're not necessarily as clear in our assessments, I think, maybe before the fact, but after the fact, the thing that always makes me kind of uncomfortable is that, are you actually solving this problem? Whether it's kind of, we can control water to go to a sprinkler head when actually the sprinkler head is the thing that sucks. So thank you for the controls before the water gets to the thing that sucks. And then on this side of things, granular activated carbon ion exchange, like really what you're doing is moving the problem. It's like, really what you need is the kind of full destruction, and really full destruction. If you're going to be able to solve it in the scale, it's just absolutely enormous. So our closing question is the one that we ask all of the guests on the fundamental molecule. And I'm particularly looking forward to the answer to this, especially because you are, as we said earlier, established very clearly earlier, you are an entrepreneurial person at the head of Large Co and with Large Co experience. So what is the one lesson from your experience that you would pass on to any emerging water founder?
So I'm going to say, find the answer within yourself, which means become the pilot of your own life. In a very authentic way, stay true to yourself based on your own strength, creating relationships across the industry and beyond, but to really drive yourself to strive to accomplish amazing things. There's no one that's going to give you the roadmap than yourself.
Fantastic. I really appreciate it. Mirka, I knew this was going to be fun. I had high expectations. It's always really fun when expectations get exceeded. I couldn't be more appreciative of the time that you spent with us this morning. You're a real inspiration to me and to a ton of other people in the water sector. So thank you so much for all of your work, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.